In the small town where the hustle of everyday life often blends into the monotony, there's a young woman named Sarah who works as a waitress at the local diner. The diner, a cozy little place tucked away at the corner of Main Street, is the heart of the community. It's always filled with regulars, from tired truck drivers passing through to families grabbing a quick meal. Sarah's life revolves around this place, her long shifts, and the one thing that keeps her going, her son Timmy. At just 26, Sarah has already learned how to juggle the demands of being a single mother and the exhausting grind of waitressing. Every day she wakes up before dawn, gets Timmy ready for school, and drops him off before rushing to work. Her shifts are long, often 10 hours or more, and her feet ache by the end of each day. The tips are usually modest, and the pay barely covers the bills, but she makes it work. For Timmy, she'd do anything. Still, despite her best efforts, she can't escape the weight of societal judgment. Being a single mom in a small town often means whispers behind her back and sideways glances. People don't always understand that life doesn't always go as planned. Some of the customers treat her as though she's a second-class citizen, a young woman with a child who doesn't quite fit the mold they expect. Some even make comments under their breath, as if her situation is something to pity. Her colleagues, though friendly, sometimes don't help matters. They offer sympathy, but there's always a trace of judgment in their eyes, like they think she's somehow failing or not doing enough. And yet Sarah fights to stay strong. For Timmy, she forces herself to smile, to push through the exhaustion, and to rise above the judgment. But sometimes, especially at the end of a long shift, the emotional toll is overwhelming. It feels like she's always on the edge, always just one step away from breaking. But she can't afford to, not with Timmy depending on her. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when he walked in. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with polished shoes that gleamed in the dim light of the diner. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that only someone with wealth and privilege could. He looked like the type of person who never had to worry about anything in the world, someone who had everything handed to him without a second thought. Sarah greeted him with her usual smile, trying to mask the exhaustion that clung to her like a shadow. As she led him to a table near the window, he glanced around briefly, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were judging the humble establishment. She gave him the menu, and he barely acknowledged her as he skimmed through it, clearly disinterested. After taking his order and making small talk, Sarah couldn't help but feel an icy tension coming from him. He seemed almost dismissive, like he thought he was too good to be here. When he finally spoke, his tone was condescending, almost deliberate. "So what's your story?" he asked, his voice casual but piercing. "You look young, but I bet you've been at this a while." Sarah, used to these types of questions, kept her composure. She chuckled lightly. "Yeah, it's a tough job, but it pays the bills." He studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Then, in a tone that felt far too loud for such a small space, he asked, "And how do you juggle it all? A kid, I assume?" The question was simple enough, but the way he phrased it sent a pang of shame through Sarah. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I have a son." His lips curled into a smirk, and he leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "A single mom, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with judgment. "Well, that explains a lot. I'm sure that's a real challenge for you." The sting of his words hit her harder than she expected. She tried to laugh it off, but it felt like her chest had tightened, as if the air had suddenly grown heavier. She nodded, keeping her tone neutral, and excused herself to give him space. But the damage was done. As she returned to the counter, she could feel her face burning with embarrassment. She fought to hold back the tears, forcing herself to focus on the next order. It wasn't the first time someone had made her feel small, but it didn't make it hurt any less. When the man finished his meal, he left without a word. As usual, Sarah picked up the check, ready to carry on with her day, but what she found on the receipt wasn't just a tip, it was a note. The words were brief, but they felt like a cruel reminder of how alone she was in this battle. And yet, as she glanced at the amount he'd left, it seemed like just another day, another reminder that people saw her as nothing more than a waitress, a single mom who was barely scraping by. The tip seemed indifferent, just another cold gesture. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new arrival. Sarah was wiping down the counter when she looked up and froze. There, standing at the entrance of the diner, was Johnny Depp. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or flashes of paparazzi. He was alone, dressed casually in a leather jacket and dark sunglasses. His unassuming demeanor was striking, No entourage, no pretensions, just a man walking into a diner, as if he were one of the many regulars who pass through every day. The other customers quickly took notice. Whispers spread across the room like wildfire, but Johnny didn't seem to mind. He looked around, gave a warm, almost shy smile to the staff, and sat at a table in the corner. The buzz of excitement lingered, but Sarah, trying to keep herself composed, carried on with her work. She had dealt with enough stress in one day to let a celebrity disrupt her focus. After a few minutes, she approached his table, nervously trying to hide the flush in her cheeks. "Hi there," she said with her usual cheerful smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" Johnny looked up, meeting her eyes with a calm, almost knowing expression. "I'll have a coffee please, black, and maybe something simple to eat. Surprise me." His voice was smooth, genuine, but not overpowering. Sarah wrote down his order, trying to push past the butterflies in her stomach. She wasn't some starstruck fan. She had a job to do, but even the most professional of waitstaff couldn't completely block out the surreal nature of the situation. Johnny Depp, sitting in her diner. The world suddenly felt a little smaller. She brought him the coffee and a small plate of toast with jam. As she set it down, Johnny looked up at her again, his smile warm. "Thank you," he said simply, his tone soft and unpretentious. "How's your day going?" Sarah was taken aback. It wasn't often that customers, especially high-profile ones, took the time to make small talk. She hesitated for a moment before replying. "It's been busy, you know, same as always. Lots of orders, a lot of customers, just trying to keep up." She kept it light, but she could feel his eyes lingering on her as if he was really listening. Johnny nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate," he said, his voice gentle. "How do you manage it all?" She forced a smile, but there was something about the way he asked, so sincere, so free of judgment, that made her feel comfortable, almost as if she could open up without fear. It had been so long since anyone had asked her that question in such a way. "I try," she said quietly. "I've got a son. Being a single mom, it's tough. People look at me and think I'm just a waitress, but they don't see how hard it is to balance everything. It's like, I'm constantly trying to prove that I'm doing enough, but sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough." Johnny's expression softened. He set his coffee down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her with an understanding that took her by surprise. "I get it," he said slowly. "Life can feel that way, like the world's always judging you, but trust me, you're doing better than you think. I know what it's like to feel like everyone's watching you, scrutinizing your every move. It's not easy, but you've got to keep pushing forward." Sarah was stunned. He wasn't just being polite. He understood, really understood. There was no pity in his voice, just empathy. She could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders just a little. In that moment she realized that Johnny Depp wasn't just a celebrity. He was someone who had faced his own battles and had come out the other side stronger. "I thank you," she said, her voice wavering a little. "That means more than you know." Johnny smiled at her, his eyes twinkling. "Don't thank me. Just know that you're doing great. You're a good mom. Keep doing what you're doing. You'll get through it." For the first time that day, Sarah felt a sense of relief. It wasn't just the kind words, it was the fact that someone, even someone who didn't know her, had taken the time to show kindness when it was least expected. Johnny Depp's simple words were enough to remind her that she wasn't alone, that there was still kindness in the world, even in the most unlikely of places. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah went about her usual routine, checking in on customers, refilling drinks, and making small talk with the other regulars. Johnny continued to sit quietly in the corner, occasionally looking out the window or sipping his coffee. The diner buzzed around him, but he remained calm, almost meditative. When he finally finished his meal, Johnny stood up with a small stretch. He gathered his things, nothing too extravagant, just his jacket and sunglasses, and then before leaving, he turned towards Sarah, who had been busy with another order. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm. "It was a pleasure. Take care of yourself, all right?" Sarah smiled, grateful for the kindness, but she barely had time to respond before he was on his way out the door. She watched him leave, still slightly in awe of the encounter, and continued wiping down the counter, her thoughts drifting back to the earlier incident with the rude customer. As she moved to clean up his table, she noticed the receipt, left behind, just like any other. But then something caught her eye. Beneath the usual total, a scribbled message in blue ink stood out. She paused for a moment, unsure of what to expect, but as she read, her heart stopped. The note read, "You're doing great, keep your head up, don't let anyone make you feel less than you are, Johnny." For a few seconds, Sarah stood still, the words echoing in her mind. The world around her seemed to fade away. She hadn't expected this. A large tip, yes, that was common, but this was something completely different. Something real, something that made her feel seen. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the receipt, the weight of the words sinking in. It felt like a gift, a reminder she never thought she would receive, especially after the cruel words from the rude customer earlier that day. Sarah blinked back the tears that threatened to form. She had been on the verge of giving up, drowning in the judgment and the weight of her own insecurities, but this small act of kindness had shifted something inside her. Johnny didn't just leave money, he left a part of himself in those words, and in that moment, Sarah realized something profound. Her worth wasn't defined by the cruel opinions of others. She didn't need anyone's validation except her own. She stood there for a long while, the receipt still clutched in her hands. The note was a lifeline that would stay with her, reminding her to hold her head high and keep moving forward, no matter how many people tried to tear her down. The note Johnny Depp had left her stayed with Sarah long after his departure. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the unexpected kindness behind them that lodged in her heart. As the hours passed, and she finished her shift, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside her. For so long, Sarah had been fixated on the judgments and the hardships of her life. She had been defined by the negative comments, the endless struggles of single motherhood, the weight of exhaustion and self-doubt that seemed to consume her. But Johnny's words, a simple heartfelt note, made her realize something crucial. She wasn't broken. She was strong. She had been so focused on the hardships, so entrenched in the notion that she wasn't enough, that she hadn't taken the time to acknowledge the resilience that had carried her this far. The sleepless nights, the long shifts, the relentless juggling of motherhood and work, none of it had been easy, but she had kept going. She was doing the best she could, and that was more than enough. The very next day, something shifted in Sarah. She walked into the diner with her shoulders a little higher, her smile a little wider. She greeted each customer with a new sense of self-assurance. The weight of judgment that had once held her back, now lifting from her shoulders. She was enough, as she was. The world had not magically become easier, but Sarah saw it with new eyes. The little things, the struggles, the tired moments, even the rude customers, no longer held the same power over her. She knew who she was, and that was all that mattered. Over time she began to pay forward the kindness that Johnny had shown her. It was subtle at first, a smile for a colleague having a rough day, a patient word for a frustrated customer. The smallest gestures began to ripple outward, and she saw how much a little kindness could change someone's day, just as it had changed hers. She became more understanding of her fellow waitstaff, more patient with customers. She realized that everyone had their own battles, and sometimes, a simple word of kindness could make all the difference. It didn't take much to make someone feel seen, to remind them that they mattered. In the end, the note wasn't just a reminder of her own worth, it was a spark, and that spark had ignited a new beginning for Sarah. One where she walked with her head held high, knowing that she was enough, no matter what anyone else said. Sarah's life was far from perfect, but the weight of the world no longer felt as heavy. The struggles, paying bills, working long shifts, dealing with judgment from strangers, were still there, but they no longer defined her. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, she began to face them with a newfound sense of purpose and strength. The exhaustion, the stress, and the isolation were just parts of her journey, but they didn't own her. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt proud of herself, proud of how far she had come, and of how she had handled everything on her own. Being a single mom wasn't a burden she needed to hide anymore. It was part of who she was, and she had every right to be proud of her resilience. Every challenge had only made her stronger, and every setback had taught her something new. The turning point had come from an unexpected place, Johnny Depp's note. It had been a simple message, a few words written on a receipt, but those words had been the spark Sarah needed. They reminded her that her worth wasn't defined by the cruel judgments of others. They reminded her that she had the power to shape her own story, to take control of her life and her future. Johnny didn't just leave a tip that day, he left her a lifeline. And though he probably never realized the impact of his small gesture, it changed Sarah's life in ways she could never. Now, every time she faced a difficult day, or encountered judgment, she thought back to those words on the receipt. They gave her the strength to keep going, to fight for her dreams, and to raise her son with love and dignity, regardless of what anyone else thought. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can make the biggest impact. And for Sarah, Johnny Depp's note wasn't just a note. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives. Thank you so much for joining us in this incredible journey of strength, resilience, and the power of kindness. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can make a life-changing difference, and that our worth is never defined by others' judgments. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Your support means the world to us, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more heartfelt stories that remind us all to keep going, no matter the challenges. Thank you again for being part of our community. Stay kind, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next video.